G'day, guys. Welcome to this week's Hash It Out. How are we, gentlemen?
Doing pretty well.
Doing well.
Nice to see. Had a nice milestone today, actually, with 5.0 ticking over, which was fantastic. Everything went smooth. So that was great to see. And that's basically a culmination of up to sort of 12 months plus work, diving into the repos and seeing some dates and things of what people were up to. It's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, 5.0 has been a long time coming. That's probably the culmination of like 2 years of thinking, development. And it's not as though the ping time increases, like the block time stays the same. It's just we have more bandwidth to fit transactions into blocks, and we get faster execution of smart contracts, which makes the network as a whole more efficient.
Yeah. So
There's this.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say there's this idea that faster is always better, right? And when you're talking about a network that is, let's say, distributed across the globe with a lot of different users with different bandwidths in terms of their internet, that's a consideration to make in a decentralized system. Faster is not always better. In fact, one question you have to ask is, if you turn up a network and you start producing blocks at a more rapid speed, where are you going to store all that data? Because the actual size of the blockchain starts growing at a quite rapid rate. You can look at something like Solana, which, the goal of that network, as they stated, was to be fast, right? And then it was relatively fast when it was up. But then, you had huge limitations in terms of the internet speeds that users that wanted to actually interact with consensus would potentially need. And you had really hefty hardware requirements because you have to store all of this, right? And so Ergo's goal has always been to be relatively conservative and use as much compression as possible, and use UTXO trimming via storage rent over time to try to take that block space and treat it like the scarce resource that it should be. If somebody, let's say in a less developed region, wants to actually act as a validator in our network, we need to consider the barrier of entry for those actors. Otherwise, if you get, some of these blockchains are now in the terabytes, the hardware expense gets more and more expensive over time, and that over time centralizes these systems.
That's one thing that I was going to mention, just on the size of the blockchains. If you a couple of examples, you could use Bitcoin and Ethereum as examples. Bitcoin's, off the top of my head, maybe 400 gigabyte, I think, thereabouts. And I think Ethereum's upwards of terabytes at this stage, and with a 20-second odd block time that it has seen in its sort of history. And that's obviously a little bit different, having the smart contracts and everything on chain and things like that. But you can definitely see a vast difference there in the size of the chains themselves.
Yeah, that's one consideration a lot of users don't take into account. Like, if you have a super fast network, that's great. You have, data accumulation, right? But then you have to ask, okay, what kind of data is in that transaction? And, when you get into executing scripts, you get basically more data involved in blocks, and it potentially makes that barrier of entry issue even worse over time. So, the big question is, how do we keep these systems small and light so that the average person can participate in consensus a decade from now?
Yeah, to me it seems like the sort of average Joe that's on Twitter, doing crypto shenanigans with a light wallet, it's a problem that many sort of regular users will never have to consider if they're, because currently, generally speaking, crypto is kind of something that we see a lot in developed nations where internet connections are good, storage space is cheap. And so presently speaking, those kinds of considerations are not something that a lot of users are really thinking about. But yeah, it's a very pragmatic approach, and something to appreciate about Ergo's conservative design for sure.
Yeah, it doesn't matter the most. And it is true that technology does, you will see more, let's say, hard drive space and more memory and, more performant machines over time. But, then you have to ask, okay, in like emerging market areas, which, to some degree, I think these tools are most valuable in. I personally would recommend everyone run a full node if you can, because it eliminates trust assumptions. Versus just the light wallet. It's great. It's user friendly. It's easy, but if you really want to support the network, go full node.
Yeah, exactly right. You're kind of sheltered as well if you just use a light wallet, like a web-based wallet and things like that, that's utilizing like back-end infrastructure, say the Explorer or things like that, where you're not doing any heavy lifting. You're just interacting with the chain through that wallet itself, through the infrastructure on the back end, where as if you have a node or a full node wallet and things like that, you're interacting basically directly to the chain itself, and have the whole state of the blockchain. And obviously with a node as well, you can enforce the rules of the protocol as well that sort of miners have to follow. It's win-win across the board. It's aiding decentralization and everything as well.
Yeah, users as a whole will trend towards whatever is the easiest, whatever is the most efficient, right? And I understand that. But one thing that you have to keep in mind is decentralized systems are inefficient. Like relative to a centralized system, every time it's going to be more inefficient. And the reason why that inefficiency is a net positive is because of your ability to create trust assumptions based on that inefficiency, let's say. So it's always going to be easier to use something that's more centralized. Mm-hmm. But then you lose the value proposition of having a inefficient network.
Yeah. So, something that we talk about a lot on this show is trying to make things as decentralized as possible, but also as accessible as possible. And that goes a long way in solving this issue. We got a long way to go for sure. But so does everybody else. It's not a problem that's been solved yet. Yeah.
With the compression of the blockchain and things like that, like Ergo's obviously got a couple of things in its little up its sleeve to be able to sort of make that a more efficient as well. One being nipper powers and SPV clients and a number of other things as well. So maybe we can chat a little about those.
Sure. So Nepo pals, to me, it sounds like a cartoon word, like Superman punch.
I love saying it. Never get old.
It's a compression technique. It really, if you want to understand that like on a very simple level, doesn't do any magic. It minimizes computational resources. That's basically it, without interfering with trust assumptions. So it allows you to run basically lighter infrastructure in a basically a more minimal environment. It costs less because it uses less energy. When you're talking how do you get a full node on a Android, I actually did see that someone did that with a Bitcoin node recently. I'm not sure what device or what the specs were, but that's great to see because the light wallet has kind of been the go-to for that particular application. But over time, the goal is to build wallet infrastructure that interacts with the P2P layer on the blockchain itself, and you don't need to go through a proxy. That's one thing a lot of people don't recognize in a way with light wallets is you are using a proxy, and that proxy could potentially lie to you, could potentially track you. There's a couple of issues there that users might want to be aware of, because you are inheriting risk, although minimal. I mean, you can say, okay, well, all of the wallets in our ecosystem go to kind of trusted nodes, right? Or trusted explorers, but the goal is to not trust anybody, to remove that from the system.
Yeah, man, if I could run a full node on my phone and have Ergo Pay integration, that's
big.
That's some good eating right there.
Yeah, but we're not that far off. I mean, I think within a year, that's potentially something that we will see. And ultimately that lightweight infrastructure is going to be really important. Even on the Explorer side, I think, lightweight infrastructure is going to be an interesting thought experiment anyway, moving forward, because the goal is to take this infrastructure and have users run it locally, right? That's ultimately what decentralization is collective localization, to where I run my node, I maybe run an Explorer, I run all of the instances that I need to not trust anybody locally. And so does Noah, so does CW, so do you watching this video. And then, you have kind of hardened the system to where even if I disappear and CW disappears and Noah disappears, you're fine, right? So long as the miners are mining and you have that infrastructure, you have full access without anybody's permission. And versus if right now we are a little bit more centralized than I would like to see. But then, you have to open the question, how many users are willing to embrace the inefficiency of decentralization?
Yeah, well, it's a funny thing. In the last week or so, I've been playing around with Bisq, which is a decentralized peer-to-peer market, essentially. And there's no liquidity for it. With BTC, there's a fair amount, but you have to run the app locally, and it works fantastically. I gotta say, it's really slick, and it's got the green button factor that we talk about, But trying to get more erg liquidity on there is something that I'm going to be pushing for in the next weeks. There's a few of us that are trying to do that.
Yeah, I think that's great to see, and I hope we do see more of that. But it's a matter of embracing the inefficiencies.
Yeah,
and that's hard to sell to, let's call them normie or new users, because they're like, oh, I just go on Coinbase and I trade on Coinbase and never really self-custody or do anything other than have a Coinbase account. And luckily, well, maybe not luckily, but that is changing as a general perception, at least. Watching FTX implode, I think a lot of people are saying, well, maybe this whole self-custody thing is kind of important.
Yeah, I had a whole conversation on Twitter today about closed source wallets and how can you really think of it as self-custody if it's closed source. But
it's hard to talk about trust assumptions, especially when it's counter to let's just say profitability. I don't know how else to put it. When, let's say, like the economics of profit and then the principles of trust assumptions are I don't know, when they challenge each other, trust assumptions lose. Look how many people are like, don't worry, Google can, track me, trace me, read all my data. Users don't give a shit. It just kind of works for them, and so they're happy, right? And I think that's even, I would think, pretty common knowledge, right? That you're being surveilled and monitored, and your search history is being stored, and all that fun stuff. But generally speaking, people don't care.
Yeah, and I think that just comes down to convenience, really. People are still in that mindset for Web 2.0 where they don't really care. They can just connect to all their services to one entity, have everything there at their fingertips, but ultimately you're at the mercy of them. Like, not your data, it's in the custody of someone else.
Yeah.
So I guess zooming out, a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about has been trying to sort of get closer to making the hard sell a little bit less hard, right?
Embrace the inefficiency. Like,
yeah,
that's a terrible thing to sell in a way, until you understand what you get. You get autonomy.
A lot of the sort of upgrades and sort of things along the roadmap of Ergo have been trying to make the inefficiencies that need to be embraced less inefficient than they could be, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to make that, let's say, a smaller lift.
Yeah, the margin of effort that needs to be put in as low as possible.
It needs to be compressed.
Yeah.
But we use, that's kind of the point of, you look at Nevo what are you doing? You're compressing, kind of the computational resources you need. If you look at layer 2 solutions, you're compressing multiple transactions into just a footprint on the chain. A lot of that can be minimized by compression techniques in various ways, but I don't think it'd be fully eliminated.
No.
Right?
And it shouldn't be. That's the whole point.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. Yeah, I agree with you, but that's a hard sell. And the reality is, okay, many general users are here to make X, right? Whatever the number is, X.
10 of them.
Yeah. Where I think it is true that a lot of people just don't care about decentralized systems. They're here to try to speculate and make money and improve their life, and good for them, I guess. But I think the clear trust assumptions are really critical to looking at decentralized networks as like peer-to-peer. Like, you have to be your own sovereign peer if you want true peer-to-peer finance. Otherwise, you start getting middlemen and gatekeepers and middleware humans and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, just sort of elaborating on the point as well that we're talking about in regards to sort of the infrastructure or the proxy side as well. You can often be a bottleneck as well. So if you're using a light client or a light wallet and connecting and trying to push through transactions, or I don't know, trying to get an NFT drop in the mempool's full, or a number of sort of scenarios like that where there is that bottleneck. Everyone's trying to drive their traffic through that one sort of entity. If you're sitting on the side and you're running your own infrastructure, interacting with the blockchain itself, and you can obviously tune up your transaction fee a little bit, make it a little bit more incentive for the miners to pick your one there as well.
That's actually happened in the history of Ergo, where I know that there was I don't even remember which. There was a NFT Ergnome drop, I think, and suddenly people were like, "Oh my goodness, we need to run full nodes because there are so many people participating. We're gonna, stress the Explorer." And the people that did run their own infrastructure, were able to participate. And I believe the Explorer actually had issues to where people, with light wallets ran into a scenario where the, backend that they were kind of bouncing off of was having issues. And
That
yeah,
happened with the Anita drop too, where like thousands and thousands of people are trying to mint all at the same time.
yeah. So okay, that's a great lesson for NFTs have done a great job in terms of teaching new users this last, I don't know, cycle, I guess you could call it, about crypto. And so maybe that's, a small performance advantage that is advantageous for them to consider running their own infrastructure and being their own sovereign actor in the network.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because using that Ergnomes example there on, I think it's Nautilus, you can increase the transaction fee up to 0.05, I believe, something along those lines, or 0.005.
Yeah, something like that.
So if you're running a full node, you just have to go one tick over that, and there's your
0.06.
incentive for the miners.
Yeah, 0.06, and that's true. I mean, there
Jump the
are
queue.
yeah, that miners will see that and mine you first because you're paying them more. There are some benefits to being a sovereign that I think even the average, user that might not care too much about decentralization, but they might want to get in on a hot NFT drop or, something like that in the future. That's a good way.
Was the gas wars in Ethereum, right? Like everybody trying to outbid each other on gas just to get their transaction through.
Yeah.
Same kind of idea.
Yeah, it's just greatly minimized because we don't run, on chain the same way, but
yeah.
And basically, yeah. And then the power's in your hands then as well. You control what you want to pay, not basically what you're told to pay, like in other Ethereum, when that network's sort of running hot.
You'll get race conditions every once in a while. Even on Ergo, periodically we've had that where everybody's trying to race to interact with the same thing at the same time, and then the question is who gets there first. And these are, we do kind of extend the proof of work mentality that miners own their blocks, and so it's up to them to accept what they put into their blocks. And how do they do that? Through a fee market.
Yeah, so on the miner side, like if I see some blocks with transactions, or I've never mined, so I don't know how this works. So forgive my ignorance. But are you able to actually choose the transactions that you want to mine, or is it just prioritized by?
Right now, anyway. Right now, the basic schema that miners run when they're mining Ergo is fee per byte. Right, so they look at the fee, they look at the size of the transaction, because again, you don't have one type of transaction. You have, interactions with smart contracts, and sometimes
things get heavy.
Yeah, sometimes things get heavy. Sometimes you're sending from multiple UTXOs to one. There's a variety of different things that can potentially impact that. And so, the base assumption was, okay, why don't we just look at the size of the transaction and the fee, and then, whatever kind of has the greatest profit margin, choose that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we started having these monster, let's say, output. Yeah, where it's like we're going to send 5,000 outputs in one transaction, and that kind of messed with the. It kind of messed with the default parameter that miners were using, because
those transactions would just sit there for hours and hours and hours.
They wouldn't get prioritized until they dropped into the block, even though there were a couple instances where the cumulative fee was probably worth including it. It's just the size of it was so big that
no one's left to compute it.
Yeah, the size of it was so big that equation kind of broke in terms of the economic incentive. So as we do move into 6.0, that's something that we've talked about, opening it up to custom miner clients, to where different pools can basically change that default parameter.
Oh, interesting.
And include what would like to include. And, that will kind of assist in the future if we do see these big multiple output type transactions. They're going to look at that differently, because right now how it's being scanned and included kind of doesn't work well for that. So something that we can improve.
I could see some potential for interesting strategies popping up. I know we've talked about like equivalents to things like MEV, and giving miners that flexibility to sort of sort what they want to mine. That's pretty cool idea.
Yeah, I think in most blockchains that's inevitable. And even if there's other default rules, I don't see why someone couldn't support their own mechanism of sorting the mempools. Like, that's just doable. If you're a block producer, and it doesn't matter proof of work, proof of stake, that's possible, right? And if it's possible and if it's profitable, it's probably going to happen. It's somewhat of a controversial topic. I look at it in terms of like the closest person has the most influence. Like, if Noah's the bank and you have a new house that defaulted, and I'm kind of closer to the bank than CW, who's the average consumer, because I'm kind of closer to you or that transaction, I can exploit that, right? And so I can pick it up quick before it hits the market and CW ever sees it.
Yep. Not naming any names there.
Yeah.
In regards to sort of just exploring what the miners will want to mine and things like that, obviously we're seeing a fair bit of that on Ethereum now with the OPEC compliance and whatnot, and the censorship and things. Is that something you possibly see here at Ergo?
Yeah, you could see that anywhere. If you're talking about what you're going to include in the mempool, right? That's always a potential. Now, certainly if a mining pool starts doing that, I'm going to be on here every time saying, screw them, mine someone else, right? And, unfortunately, I think there hasn't been much of a backlash, sadly, within the Ethereum community. I don't understand that. They're like, oh, it's fine. Okay, you get pushed a couple of blocks, eventually you'll get dropped in, right? And even that in and of itself is potentially quite negative. If you have a majority of the block producers that are saying, okay, you have to be from certain jurisdictions, right? Well, now users that are trying to, let's say, interact in DeFi or other applications are at the back of the bus.
Yeah.
They're just at the back of the bus. It's like, oh, your transaction will get dropped when it gets dropped. Well, what if we take it to like the NFT scenario and they never pull something, or you take it to the DeFi scenario and whatever profit incentive is there is potentially gone because you have these fuckers censoring blocks. Oops.
Right.
Fire up, Joe.
I mean, the whole point of blockchain, in my opinion, is to try to create more equitable systems.
Yeah.
If you look at that in terms of how it's breaking the system from being equitable user to user, that's a problem. Like, I would be pissed if I saw that in Ergo, and I would speak up. I don't see enough of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would, that's for sure. Obviously, having that similar mindset throughout the ecosystem itself here at Ergo. I don't think our ecosystem will be one to sort of sit back and sort of let that happen. There's numerous sort of ways to go around that. No, it's obviously education and making miners aware of sort of the pools that they're pointing their hash towards, and whether they they want to align with that or not. It's up to them whether they put their hash rate onto a new pool that's spun up instantly to sort of counter whatever that pool X is doing to sort of censor certain transactions in the main pool.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing too, with the way that native assets work in Ergo. I have to imagine the kind of censorship it would be very different. I know there's like with Ethereum, my understanding is that because of the way the account model is, or the way that the account model works, is that it's easier to see if a coin has been tainted in some way, like if it's gone through Tornado Cash or something.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas with UTXO native assets, my understanding is you'd have to sort of trace back through where that specific UTXO has been and sort of like
It's
reverse
messier.
engineer. It's so much messier. Yeah.
Messier. Now, if somebody is,
It's possible for sure.
yeah, you can build visualization tools to do that. In my opinion, it's really not that big of a step. It is one, thing that's talked about a lot with, say, the benefits of UTXOs. People say, oh, there's greater privacy, and to a degree, that's true for normie users. But there has been tools out there to track and trace and follow Bitcoin for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
So
I think the biggest thing for the normal user is not being able to read the Explorer for UTXO.
Yeah, exactly. You have to read the Explorer, and it is kind of messy compared to looking at the account model.
Been trying to push for a simplified view on there. We'll see.
Yeah, but that was broken in Bitcoin years ago. So I don't think that really holds a lot of water in terms of a serious adversary. Just normie users, will get confused by UTXO.
Yeah, and more to Noah's point as well. Just the models themselves with the accounting side. So, say you run a coin through or an ether through Tornado Cash, and then you transfer it to your wallet. Your whole wallet then is then tainted because there's no way to distinguish which coin that went through that mixer or Tornado Cash. On the UTXO side, you can sort of single each UTXO out in some respect.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of going to be interesting to watch. Personally,
it's still an unknown.
I'm fully in support of privacy tooling. I think it has a great use case. I think it's a human right. And, I think that we shouldn't ask for permission, because if these type of systems were built solely with permission from a third party, what's the point of a peer-to-peer financial system?
The frustration.
Yeah. But, there's a lot of people that join this space and they're like, but I want my X. That's
X.
That's what their mind is at. I want the X. I want the good numbers and I want the X. And if that gets me closer to that, then forget about first principles.
Yeah.
It's something you touched on last week, actually, I think it was this show, when we were talking about starting to think in, like, say, nano-erg or Satoshis and things like that, not thinking in US dollars. Obviously, one erg's one erg and things like that. Think about what that value is on chain and what that can sort of do for you in the future, not sort of taking that X or that 1X or whatever, and then transferring that to US dollars to obviously sort of put you in a better financial situation.
It's peer-to-peer money.
Yeah.
That's kind of the goal. The only difference with Ergo is we extended it to have better trust assumptions in terms of people, protocol, logic, so we could build financial tools on top of that peer-to-peer money. But I think that core assumption is the same.
So should change topics a little bit. I was thinking with 5.0 being today, it might be useful to reflect on what 4.0, 3.0, and 2.0 were. Offhand, I don't really know what those each sort of represented, or what each one brought, sort of what the building blocks of each.
Well, we start with Autolycos 1.
1.0, baby.
Yeah, where we had, you were mining to your private key, and so mining was a lot more democratic. It was a very different ecosystem then. One thing that's a pro and a con with miners, right, is there's not a lot of politics. A lot of miners they set up their rigs, they forget they live life, they, do maintenance, make sure everything is running. Like that as a consensus layer isn't too social. It's kind of like the grubby basement and garage miners. You gotta love them because they're generally pretty low drama, and so a lot of the social engagement was, on the Ergo forum, and a lot of that just had to do with, how do I connect? How do I optimize? What's the settings for my cards? Set it, forget it, maintain it. And then we had somebody break the, let's say, non-outsourceability via smart contracts. So then you had an actor starting to pool resources, and that started to give them an advantage over solo miners. So we were kind of forced to say, okay, what do we want? We want an equitable system, right? That's kind of the goal. And so, Ergo had a fork that got turned off. And, it did kind of change things a little bit. On the one side, that's something that a lot more miners were familiar with, pool mining, right? Like that the whole solo miner thing with that was like, 2016, 2015. That's when that was cool. Then yeah, then so it used to be painful. You'd sync this node and it would take a long time, and mining was a lot of work.
Yeah.
At that point. And then
so 2.0 was that hard fork.
Yeah, we kind of moved into an era of adopting pools. And so with pools, we did get more users because that's kind of where the consciousness of miners is at the moment, because that's what they've experienced. Good or bad, I guess that's depends. I mean, even back in the day, you could potentially, if you had the space, you could have two different nodes and then just activate them and do settings and mine different chains, but it took a lot of work versus, now you just have like, the operating systems that you can hop from one chain to another chain with different config settings in a matter of seconds. And so the barrier of entry got, it's nothing really.
Yeah, HiveOS did I don't know, I think it's marvelous what it did for the mining industry in one respect, where it's basically just a big green button, being able to swap chains in just a couple of clicks, changing flight sheets and everything like that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, for the individual, it does deliver a lot of value. For projects, it makes security a lot more, I don't know, mobile, which maybe that's a good thing, right? Because then you kind of have the ability to say, okay, we're now competing for resources that, where they're not locked into a relationship with us. So we need to deliver value. Otherwise, they're just out the door. I think that's fair. Like there are some people that, absolutely hate what Hive did because, people aren't loyal, right? But why do they need to be stuck in a relationship? What is that?
Yeah, just make the better product.
Yeah,
give
make the
miners
better
a reason to stick around.
Exactly. Deliver value. That should always be the goal. So with that, we got a lot more community, and with community, we got more development, right? And so the upgrades since then have been more development oriented. Like we look at 5.0, we kind of see increase in terms of the bandwidth and smart contract engine, script processing, and block space efficiency. So from that point, it's been more oriented towards, kind of the development side. I guess
4.0 was the EIP 27, right?
Yeah, that was kind of its own. Well,
Yeah.
It kind of rolled back, but yeah, that was kind of its own hard fork. That was just, we were saying, okay, well, based on the rate of development that we're seeing, we might need more runway.
And then 3.0, I don't know if I don't know if I was around when that one happened. I can't
I'd
remember.
have to look.
Yeah, I can't remember what that was. It's a while
Or
ago
I
now.
might believe.
Oh, I've been reading the dev updates. Now I'm stuck on like 2.2.2 to 2.2. The
Yeah,
nice
the wallet app.
the Ergo wallet app is stuck in my head.
2019. Let's see. I'm gonna do a quick dive real quick. You guys
Yeah.
keep talking.
Should we get into 6.0 a little bit?
Yeah. Let's talk about the future. We've talked a good amount about the past and where we've come from.
Sure.
I know there's not like a hard specific plan yet, but we sort of have a big picture idea of where we might be going.
Yeah. Okay. So, first thing I would say, 6.0 has to do with scalability and sustainability, right? We've done a really good job of building out tooling, and we've seen great community development, and it's time for us to start asking long-term questions. In terms of, let's say, network maintenance and functionality and scalability, and put forward a long-term vision or path that needs to be community oriented. I think that if that just comes from the Ergo Foundation, in a way, the Ergo Foundation is failing the community, because in my mind, it's been a necessary evil, right? Like, you have to have a counterparty to do business. I know that there's these blockchains in the space that say, oh, we have no foundation, we have no da 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 da. Guess what? I've seen the contracts that exchanges have. I know how market making works. Somebody is signing them. And so if you don't have like an entity that's representing the ecosystem, you have a whale that is. And you don't know who that whale is, and they have information advantage over you, and that's sketchy. It's just sketchy, because like the reality of business in this space is that actor exists. They may not have a title and call themselves something, but they exist, and they have more money than you, and they have more knowledge than you, and they're probably trading against you. Like, that's common sense, but you have to understand that you're not going to get a listing without a counterparty.
Right.
So who that actor is in a lot of systems, we don't know. For the Ergo community, you have a face. You have an entity that at least is transparent with you in terms of, being the counterparty, and giving some assurance that we're not trying to front run you or trade against you, or manipulate that information asymmetry. But longer term, I would love to see an association of companies that maintain the core protocol. Maybe that, grows from Sigmanauts. Maybe that grows from commercial entities that are interested in developing on Ergo, but it makes the core protocol more decentralized and survivable, right? So that's something I would love to see, at least as a game plan in 6.0. In terms of scalability, that's kind of like the longevity of the network in terms of congestion. That's something that we need to come together, solve, have open source solutions that multiple developers could potentially scale. That way they're not burdening the base layer, because long term, layer one is just for settlement. I do think that it will kind of fade from interacting with layer one over enough time as the ecosystem develops enough. So that's something we need to prepare for. We're already seeing that with Ethereum, right? And I do think that's a path we need to prepare for. The other aspects are EIPs and potential upgrades that developers need, right? And that may allow us to potentially package that and say, okay, well, what upgrades do we want to add? Kind of with the long-term vision in mind that comes from, the community, the developers that are actually building this tooling versus, us, the Ergo Foundation. And hopefully by the time that, let's say, 6.0 phase releases, we do have, a path for scalability. We have a path for sustainability as well. And, then I think we'll be in a different era of development by the time that fully rolls around.
Yeah, it's exciting to think about, obviously, people taking the reins of the protocol itself and sort of pushing updates and things that they want to see as well across the board. Like you said, there could be a numerous entities there, whether that's, like you said, stems from the Sigmanauts or commercial entity, or who knows, someone else from a different ecosystem coming in, from developer on a chain, whatever, coming in and doing their part. It's obviously decentralizing the resourcing load, and you're not just dependent on sort of one central entity that's taking basically the core protocol and running with everything they sort of want to do there. Obviously, with the governance side, miners sort of do have the last vote then as well on sort of what is actually implemented, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And my goal in a way has always been to work myself out of a job, right? Not that I don't like making videos, but I don't like making videos, and it's needed, right? The Ergo Foundation is needed at this point. Some point in the future when we have enough market access to where we have, association, different companies that are interested in driving the adoption of Ergo, I would love to, kind of work on the development side more. Say, okay, how do we build good systems with clear risk assumptions, and not just in terms of the code, but actually the, let's say, financial protocols, and how do we have better trust assumptions with people, and really see how we could use this technology in interesting ways. But for now,
talking to the exchanges and
yeah. For now, I'm
now talking to us.
I'm talking to everybody. I really do try to just open doors for anybody and everybody in the ecosystem. And who knows, maybe by the time I can decentralize myself, if my contact list of people doesn't care, I just open source it. Say, here, if you want to develop, here, talk to this exchange, talk to this, actor. I don't know, maybe people wouldn't like that, but I don't want to be a gatekeeper.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and obviously it's an exciting point because you see a lot more maturity within the ecosystem then as well.
Yeah, and I think we're getting there. If you look at a lot of the core tooling that's coming out of the Ergo ecosystem, number one, I'm super proud that it's open source. That the embracing the inefficiency of open source development is something that we've seen from the developer community, and that's powerful. In my mind, because then you get open discourse and debate. This week we had 3 wallet developers that are all talking to each other about the best way to implement one thing. Like, those 3 minds will outperform 3 separate minds every single time, in my opinion, because they're going to bring different perspectives and solutions, and basically their intelligence is going to kind of hive a little bit. And you can look at Paideia as a good example. That's all open. You can look at ErgoPad.
It's pretty awesome.
Spectrum, it's the same thing, and that's powerful in my mind. So I do think that embracing that inefficiency on the development side is going to serve us really well in the future, because everybody's going to have a vested interest to improve it.
Right.
Once again,
all about
beating that drum.
The incentives of open source. And
yeah, exactly. I know we've said it numerous times throughout this sort of video series as well, and we'll keep saying it as well. Obviously, the collective mind share drives the innovation and everything forward. Obviously, lowers the barrier for entry for someone coming into the ecosystem to be able to pick up some tutorials or dive through someone's GitHub and get some ideas on which way they sort of implemented a certain solution. So yeah, it's interesting sort of way to go about things, and yeah, I'm definitely proud of everyone in the community jumping on that, and then also people who don't really have that technical background also chiming in and sort of demanding it and wanting to sort of see open repos and things like that also.
Yeah, then the having, let's say, DAO tooling, that community management, I think is going to be powerful, because then you potentially have kind of the protocol with cryptographic trust. You have a certain trust assumption that you can make with open source code, and then we get into this idea of how do we mitigate risk and instill trust when we're working with people, right. And that's always a sketchy thing in this industry, to where people will disappear with a lot of money and say whoops, or never deliver something and say whoops, and it kind of puts people at the mercy of trust, and the goal is to distribute and eliminate that as much as possible. So moving forward, I'm pretty excited to see what this ecosystem can do working together.
Yep, most definitely. All right, gents. Well, we're coming up to time now. We're running a little bit over. We're almost up to an hour now. We try to kind of keep these to around 40, 45 minutes or so. Is there any last words you want to say about what we've sort of discussed today?
I'm excited to work with the community to move towards 6.0.
Yeah, 5.0 has been a long time coming, and it almost doesn't feel like it has happened. Like, been looking forward to it for so long, and now it's here, and it's like, okay, we did it.
When
6.0. And we just got to keep going. It's not like we stop working on everything we're doing. So yeah, let's keep it going. See what's next.
Yep. The Code Forge is running hot, and will continue to do so for a long time here at Ergo. So thanks everyone for tuning in. It's been a pleasure chatting once again, gentlemen. We'll catch you next week. Have a good one.
Thanks.